Let's go ahead and get started. This is the last session where I'll be covering financial aid, the new flat rate tuition plan, and answering questions about residency and how residency will work in the future. Following this session, for those who signed up, we do have neighborhood tours to drive you around the quadrant of town, which is this northeast quadrant, showing you kind of areas where students typically live, or to have ideas of kind of where apartments are versus duplexes, single-family housing, things like that. Let me double check my schedule so I know how to stay on schedule here. So this is going to go for about 45 minutes. The tours start at 3, so I'll stay here and answer questions individually if people have those questions. I'll make myself available, okay? The financial aid information session. And why did I just turn that off? Okay, there we go. So these are the contacts for our financial aid office. Within the law school, the financial aid processing for our internal aid, what I call our internal aid, which is our merit scholarship, our need-based scholarship program, and some of the summer fellowships, are administered out of our student services, inclusion, and admissions suite. The university's Office of Financial Aid and Scholarships administers university-based aid and the federal student loan program. So your packaging is going to come primarily from them in terms of the email you will get through the computer information system, the CIS system, that'll show you what the package is. The person who we work with from the university's office is Shelley Reese. We are assigned a program manager, just the law school, medical school, and dental school. We share Miss Reese. The rest of the university uses kind of this alphabet assignment system for the rest of financial aid. Her contact information is in that booklet you got, Your Future Begins, here on page 47, but this is her direct contact information. She is here at the law school on Wednesdays from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. You don't need an appointment. You can just do a drop-in. We call those drop-in hours. If you want to schedule an appointment with her, you need to contact her. Her office, I'll call it the full-time office, is primarily in the university's Student Services building. You'll definitely want to set an appointment if you're going to meet with her on any other day, because she also has office hours in those other professional schools that I mentioned. Okay, as it relates to financial aid, I want to talk about processing, timelines, the federal student loan programs, and how scholarships work here at the law school. A version of this, as I mentioned, is in that booklet. The most helpful part is the checklist on that first page, 47. It kind of gives you the outline of what is involved. How many of you are returning to school after being out for 3 or more years? Ooh, there you go. So things have changed. If you used federal financial aid, namely the student loans, things have changed since you were in school last. One thing to be aware of, at least as beginning graduate school or professional school, is if you were on Pell Grants as an undergraduate, Pell Grants don't apply to graduate or professional school. So that part of the federal system has gone away. Also, part of the federal system that has gone away for you as a graduate or professional student returning is subsidized loans, that the loans that you will be borrowing will all be accruing interest, and I'll get into detail about that. The other major change that has occurred since you were a student is how they determine what's called your estimated family contribution. As a graduate student, the good news is you will no longer have to provide parental information when you're filling out your free application for federal student aid, because you're automatically considered independent. But in calculating your aid, they're using what is now called the prior year. When you were students 3 years or more ago, you used your taxes from the tax year you complete in whatever spring period you're in for the next cycle. So in the past, if it had remained the same, you would use the taxes you're filing right now, which is your 2017 tax year, to determine your eligibility for aid for the 2018-19 school year. The federal government felt it would delay people in finding out about their financial aid to wait until they did their most recent taxes. So they changed their mind and said, we're going to go back 2 years, since most people will have their taxes from 2 years ago, to calculate the aid. That made it really better for families sending kids as undergraduates to college. but it really makes it kind of tough for graduate students because your 2 years ago aid is not representative of what your income is going to be in starting the new year, which is 0, right? But that's what we have to work with. And know that if you have been putting off doing your FAFSA form until you do your taxes this year, you don't need to do it. You use your 2016 taxes to complete the form, okay? In processing, and I'll get to that in a little bit, there's kind of a workaround for your current financial situation being more representative in determining your need than your 2 years past, but there's some caveats. The important thing to make sure you keep in mind is when you fill out the free application for federal student aid, you include the University of Utah's code, that 3675 number. For those of you who have applied and been admitted to more than 10 schools, I believe it's 10, the federal system only allows you to list, I believe, up to 10 schools on that form, and then you send it out. For any schools beyond that number, you can't add on there. What you have to do is delete some schools and then include the new schools. So fill that out, send it off to the schools who you want to get the information first, make sure they've received the information, then go back into the system, delete whatever number of schools you need to delete, and then include the new schools that you want to add. So that's the only way that that will work in terms of the limited number of slots it has for schools and their code numbers. Make sure, well, the choice is yours, but in uploading the tax information, it's a lot easier on you if you allow the Department of Education who processes this stuff to use the IRS data retrieval tool. By checking yes to that, they can just go to your tax information online and confirm the information as being correct, at least as far as what has been given to the IRS. And it's much less likely that you'll be selected for verification. There are some students who will be selected for verification randomly, but if you use the IRS data tool, data retrieval tool, it helps reduce your chances for that selection. If you are selected for verification, recognize that you have to turn in some hard copy material to the university. You will be informed in an email sent to your CIS email address. If you have not activated that, you were given that activation information and the student ID number that you used to activate it. If you haven't activated it, I encourage you to do so because the university's policy is that they will only communicate through that secured email system in talking to you about financial aid. It's to protect your data and our data. So you can't email back and forth using your current school, if you're at a different school's email address, or a Gmail or a Yahoo email address. You won't, we just, for security reasons, won't communicate that way. Yes? If you were a student at the U.S., do you have to do anything else? The question is, if you were a student at the University of Utah as an undergrad or graduate, former student, your student ID is attached to your CIS email, and so you will be fine in the processing. Once you enroll in law school, there is, I want to call it a pseudonym, but I know it's not a pseudonym, an alias that will add a suffix to your email address that is @law.utah.edu, but in reality, it continues to be your unid plus utah.edu. Okay, so you should be fine. Any other questions? All right. The university will start packaging your financial aid next week if you've done all the FAFSA stuff. And this is where you'll be notified of being selected for verification. If they start the packaging and then you get randomly selected or selected for any other reason, they'll notify you and then they'll stop the processing until you meet the verification requirements. So make sure you submit that documentation. That is something that I would say most commonly trips students up in the process, is not looking for that verification note. No, everything stops there. This early in the process, it's so, since they're just starting to upload data, for people who have received scholarship offers from us, that information isn't always included in that initial award packaging. Just know that if you are getting a scholarship from us, the eligibility of the amount of loans that you are getting will be reduced by whatever the value of your scholarship is, because you cannot receive more in financial aid under the federal system than what your total cost of attendance is minus any scholarships or other kinds of loans that you may be getting in the system. So we'll update it as we get towards the summer, but anticipate that change if you don't see a scholarship showing up on that initial award packaging. There is some material that you can do that you'll need to complete or processing in terms of accepting or declining aid. On our admitted student page, there will be instructions for this thing called accepting Graduate Plus loans. Now I'll get into that detail of what a Graduate Plus loan means, but know that your initial award packaging from the university will only show a $20,500 unsubsidized direct loan. Our cost of attendance is going to be higher than that $20,000. You'll be eligible for more aid, especially in the form of that Graduate Plus loan, but it takes an additional step. The reason we require that additional step is to make sure you are aware of the fact that this is a different type of loan and it has a slightly higher interest rate and that you are requesting it. It's just not automatically given to you. That's kind of part of our debt management processes here. Once you accept your aid, before you enroll, you'll have to go through an orientation process and a process where you fill out a master promissory note. So if you're a former student at the University of Utah and you are taking out student loans as an undergraduate student or a graduate student in another discipline, you'll have to do a new master promissory note because you're in a new degree program. Okay? And if you're just new to the university, just know that you'll have to do a new master promissory note for the notes you take out, for the loans you take out. When you go into the campus information system, the red arrow is pointing to where you go into to get financial aid information, and then your award letter will show up there when you click that tile. For those of you who have been away from the University of Utah for a while, our CIS page looks really different than it did from just a year ago. So you're going to want to spend some time navigating it to figure it out. You'll spend a lot of time in CIS because we use this and an app system for assigning lockers, your registration in your second and third years, things like that. So you'll become very familiar with this system and this page. Okay, so how do you figure out this paying for law school thing? It starts with the cost of attendance budget. If you're new to financial aid, know that what drives this process is what it costs the average student to attend school here. The average student is a student who lives in a one-bedroom apartment and pays about $700 a month in rent. So in resident tuition for the 17-18 school year, the one that we're currently in, is $27,700. Non-resident tuition will reflect a new flat rate of $37,000. It's a big drop from our previous non-resident tuition rate. I'll explain how that new amount came to be and how it is affecting non-residents. We just got notice, or the press was just published, the Board of Regents' decision on tuition increases for next year, and next year's tuition is going to go up by 3.9%. So resident tuition will be approximately $28,800, I believe, for the year. And that $37,000 was actually our estimate of what next year would be. So it's going to be really close to that number for non-residents. We try to anticipate what the tuition would be plus the increase. So that's going to stay close. We'll release those numbers once the university authorizes us to release those numbers. We anticipate that'll be in the next 2 to 3 weeks. In terms of that cost of attendance budget, the cost of attendance budget incorporates these elements. Room and board, books and supplies. That asterisk on the supplies reflects that $4,400 includes a $2,300 allocation for a laptop computer purchase if you want to buy a new laptop. You don't have to buy a new laptop. If you're comfortable with the system you have, you can save $2,300 by not taking out that money. If you choose not to buy a laptop and yours crashes in your second year and you need to buy a new one, as long as you didn't borrow that money in your first year, you can go back to the financial aid office and say, I didn't use that allocation my first year, so I'd like to borrow that in my second year. And they'll just go back in the books and make sure that you didn't borrow your cost of attendance to the maximum amount. They'll look and say, yeah, you still had $23 of eligibility, $2,300 of eligibility, so they'll let you borrow that. They'll add that to your cost of attendance. So be aware of that. Travel, loan fees, and miscellaneous expenses. So in terms of the total cost of attendance for folks living with their students who are residents, about $39,000, 48, a little over 48. For those living on campus, 47.5 for off campus, and 48 for non-residents living with parents, 57 for non-residents on, and then 58 for those living off campus. It reflects those tuition costs. That's the maximum amount of money, whatever your classification is, that you can receive in financial aid. One of the areas that I sometimes see mistakes is in how students classify themselves, living with parents, commuter. The way they fill out the form, sometimes they're like, yeah, I'm 40 years old and I live in my house, so yes, I'm living at home. And they get the lower budget because the question really is intended for undergraduates, I will say, who are living at home. So if you notice that when you get your award letter, it's a pretty low number, and you're like, no, I can't live on this, you might want to check how you're classified and where you're expected to be living. And if it's incorrectly noted, make that correction with Shelley on that. Note that the budget chart that I just showed you, that cost of attendance is for the 9-month school year. If you choose to go to summer school and you go to summer school for 5 credits or more, if you do a clinic here or in Washington, D.C., or you want to do a study abroad, you'll get a new cost of attendance budget for that summer term, and then that'll make you eligible for financial aid during that term. But until that registration happens, the budget you're going to be looking at is just for the 9 months. For those of you with children, you can increase your cost of attendance budget if those children are under the age of 12 and they're living with you. If you're a non-custodial parent, you may be able to get some increase, but it will not reflect what the numbers are here. To increase your cost of attendance, depending on age, you'll meet with Shelley and fill out some paperwork showing that you have dependent children, they'll ask for social security numbers, and then some other documentation, and you can increase your eligibility for aid for their support. I personally recognize that $3,000 to $5,000 does not reflect the amount of money that it costs you to support a kid during school year, but this is the federal government's rules and their formula, so this is what we have to work with and what you have to work with in that category. And these are national rules, it's not just Utah that applies this. Going back to that concept, re-emphasizing it, you cannot receive more than the cost of attendance. You can, if you need more aid, affect that cost of attendance if, for example, you have a chronic illness that requires either a higher insurance premium or payment of care for you or your dependents. You'll need documentation for that, but you can increase those costs. If, for example, like my daughter, you have dyslexia and you need a special software program on your computer to do either dictation or reading for you, you can request an increase in your cost of attendance to buy that software package, all right? So there's ways to increase these costs if you're in unique situations. If unexpected but reasonable costs are incurred during the school year, you break your arm playing soccer and you have to go and pay your emergency bill, you can increase your cost of attendance to meet those costs to pay that doctor bill. You'll just need to provide documentation. Another kind of common one is we are a commuter campus, so if your transmission goes out and you live in the south end of the valley and you need your car to get here, you can increase your cost of attendance to buy that $1,000 new transmission if you need to. So this isn't a number that's absolutely set in stone. It can be adjusted so that if you have needs in the future, it can be adjusted. Okay. Expenses not allowed in that cost of attendance, though. As I mentioned, it's based on the average cost of attendance for the average student. And there's limitations on what the federal government says we can use and how we define this average student or the numbers we calculate. So car payments, or any consumer debt for that matter, those aren't incorporated into your cost of attendance. So if you have a really high credit card bill that you're trying to pay down right now and you don't get it paid off by the time you start summer school, you cannot request that you increase your cost of attendance to meet those payments. That's a personal expense as they see it. Support of a stay-at-home spouse or family members who are not dependents or under the age of 12. Those costs aren't going to be incorporated. I understand how the math works. If you have 1 or 2 kids and it's actually going to cost you more to have a spouse work and pay child care expenses at a daycare, but here again, these are the federal rules, and so recognize that. Payment of prior consumer debt, I already covered that. Periods of non-enrollment, summer. So that is something, and this is something to think about regardless if you go here or not. That is, you're contemplating how am I going to get through the summers if I don't get a job. If they have a summer school program, you can take summer classes and that'll help you meet your living expenses during the summers, since it's a period that potentially is non-enrollment, but you can at least have that option. And then relocation. If you're going to be moving here from across the country, those expenses are not incorporated into your cost of attendance budget. You're expected to meet that expense yourself. Any questions in what I've covered on that? Yes.
As far as tuition goes, I'll be starting a combined JD MBA. What does that look like for combined programs?
So for the question is, how does it look for combined programs in a JD MBA or any of our other joint degree programs? I'll get to that on the section that covers how things are changing for our flat rate tuition. But the quick answer to your question is you'll want to strategize how you're enrolling by the credit hour. So if you're in the MBA program, they still charge by the credit hour. Our blocks are going to be divided into 8 credit blocks. So you're going to be charged one portion of that flat rate for enrolling for 1 to 8 credits, and then an additional block for being enrolled 9 to 16 credits. So you'll want to be as close to that 8 credits for the credits that you're taking here, and then you'll be adding to that amount whatever credit hours you've enrolled for the MBA. Okay, that's kind of the quickest answer I can give you. Timelines. Do your FAFSA. If you haven't done it, do it as quickly as possible. You don't have to wait to have your taxes this year done. Just need your 2016 taxes. We've gone out with our first round scholarship offers. The candidates who have been offered scholarships in our first round will have until Friday, April 6th to accept or decline that aid. We go into our second round decisions. We're evaluating candidates who have been accepted since the end of March through yesterday. And over the next week, we'll be evaluating those candidates. They will be compared to what budget we have remaining after the 6th, and then we'll go out with our second round offers in early April. Next week, hopefully, the Office of Financial Aid will begin packaging student loans, so you'll be getting your award letters then, or they will be posted. Second round scholarships will be going out the week of April the 9th. If you get selected for verification, you'll be notified as part of that packaging, so be aware of that and complete it as soon as possible. The need-based scholarship application deadline is April 16th. That is a deadline set so that if you want to find out as soon as possible what you qualify for, we'll get it out. We will continue to award need-based scholarships as long as we have the budget to do that. So if you don't make that deadline, don't just not apply. Apply, but just know that you'll hear back from us later. And then we'll be awarding making those scholarship decisions in late April with award letters going out. July 1st is the residency application. For those of you who are currently classified as non-residents, you'll need to turn that in by that date. But know that there's 2 important deadlines in being reclassified as a resident. The first is getting the documentation you need to demonstrate that you're creating ties with the state of Utah to evidence an intent to remain. So that means getting your driver's license, voter registration, car registration, and being prepared to demonstrate you've been here for 12 continuous months before the start of school. That documentation needs to be completed by May 1st. If you arrived on July 31st of last year, and that's when the clock stops ticking, everything else except the verification for that 12-month timeline is still going to be due, needs to be completed before May 1st. And then you need to turn in your application by July 1st. Any questions on that? And I'll get into a little bit more on the residency in a moment. Nope. Okay, so your loan options. You got federal unsubsidized direct loans and federal Graduate Plus loans, which also happen to be unsubsidized. And then there's private loan programs. Quickly about private loan programs. I am cautioning people, I've always cautioned people about taking out private educational loans. You've probably, since you signed up for the LSAT, because of the way Google and Facebook works, have been getting like the pop-up ads. You know, Citibank has a student loan for you. American Express has a loan for you. Discover Card has a student loan for you. Know that because Overall interest rates are fairly low. A number of those loans will have interest rates that appear to be low. Well, they are lower than the federal student loan interest rates are, which I'll show you in a moment. The challenge that you will have with those loans, in my opinion, are twofold. One is those are variable interest rate loans with no cap. So what does that mean? It means if we enter an inflationary cycle, the interest rates on those loans will go up to follow that LIBOR rate. And if we end up in something as bad as like what we had in the 1970s where interest rates were at 17%, those loans could go that high. There's no cap on that. So be very cautious about how you intend to pay off those loans and how quickly you would be able to pay off those loans after school. The second is they don't have the repayment benefits that the federal student loan programs have, namely income-based repayment and loan forgiveness if you enter public interest work or if you're in a low-paying job that results in you still having a loan principal balance after 20 years of repayment. Under the federal system, some of the benefits that are available to borrowers include cancellation of the loans if you happen to pass away or become 100% disabled. That's how come the interest rates are a little bit higher. It covers those expenses. But the thing about those loans is if you're fairly young and you have a couple $100,000 of student loan debt, at least your estate won't be responsible for that. Whereas with a private loan, your estate is on the hook for whatever amount you borrow from the private lenders. There is secured interest in that regard. Also, there's no loan forgiveness under the private programs like with the public service loan forgiveness programs that we currently have under the federal system. There are rare instances, in my opinion, where private loans may make sense. For example, if you're an affluent person and you have a really strong stock portfolio, and the interest you're making on that or the growth on that is higher than what you would be accruing on interest on those private loans, then maybe you work the margins out. If you have that kind of money, you probably have a financial advisor and you need to talk to them about that. But other than that, I think it's a fairly rare situation in which the private loans are the better path to follow, in my opinion. Know that on private loans, though, you are not eligible for government loans once you graduate for law school. So you may need to turn to private educational loans for what are called bar study loans. It's like what doctors take out for their residency loans. And just realize that that may be available. The other thing that's challenging about the private loan program system is that they do look at your FICO score. So sometimes students will need co-signers to be eligible for those loans to even qualify. The Federal Direct Unsubsidized Loan Program. This is what I call an entitlement program. It's a program where, unless you're in default on a federal student loan, that you get this money. So know that you qualify for $20,500 in student loans per year. So that's $61,500 you have available for law school, regardless of where you go. Interest does accrue while you're in school, so it'll be building, and then it attaches to that principal or capitalizes once you graduate. One of the things that frustrates me about this program is there's a variable part of the interest rate associated with this. And that's how come, the reason I have 4 years is to show you how that's been fluctuating, but also serve as examples of the way it works. When you borrow this money, the interest at which you borrow this money is the interest for the life of that part of the loan. So for the students who just graduated in 2017, the students who graduated in this academic year, in their first year, the student borrowed $20,500 and the interest rate was 6.2%. And as long as they have that loan and if they don't consolidate it, that's the interest for that $20,500. And then in their second year, when they borrowed the next $20,500, the interest for that portion of it dropped to 5.8. And then in their third year, it dropped to 5.3. So they have 3 different interest rates on each portion of that loan that they borrow. It makes it difficult to predict what your overall debt will be over the term of your repayment because you don't know what your debt for that year is going to have as an interest rate until July 1st. Just before school starts. But that's the system we have to work with. We had our first uptick this class year to 6%. We anticipate it'll go up again because the Fed just raised interest rates and it follows the LIBOR rate. So anticipate that. It's hard for me to predict what's going to happen for the 3 years they're going to be in law school. I wish I could. But know that there is a cap. It can't go above 9.5%, which is high in my opinion, but there is at least a cap unlike the private loans. The Graduate Plus loan, I call this the bridge loan program. So for us, that cost of attendance for most of you is going to be around $48,000. If you don't get a scholarship from us, either need-based or merit-based, you're like, all right, so I'm going to have to do the loan thing. I got $20,000 that I know that I'm going to be eligible for, but how am I going to pay for the rest? It's with the Graduate Plus loan program. The thing about the Graduate Plus loans is that it doesn't have a cap. It doesn't have a numerical cap. The limit on how much you can borrow from this loan program is the cost of attendance minus any other aid. So if you're looking at some other schools, know that this is probably going to be the bridge loan. If they have a cost of attendance budget of $70,000, then you can borrow up to $50,000 of this loan after you borrow the Stafford loan at $20,000. If it's below us, if it's a $30,000 loan, you can only borrow $10,000 in terms of that. So that makes sense in terms of how that eligibility works. Interest rates are a little bit higher. It has a cap that's higher at 10.5. And unlike the Stafford loan, there is a credit eligibility that you have to meet. And the credit criteria is not a FICO score, but it's a determination of whether or not you have an adverse credit history. So this is good and bad. It's bad to the extent that, yes, they're going to check your credit history, and if you have debt that has shown to be, where am I going? 90 days or more delinquent for any debt, not just federal, but consumer debt, you would not be eligible for this loan. So, but the good news is even if you're ineligible based on this adverse credit history, because it's not tied to a FICO score, you can rehabilitate this. You can work with your creditors and say, hey, just don't show me that I'm delinquent, and I'll be able to start making minimum payments once I can get my student loans. Or if you pay down that debt to a certain level, will they be able to do it? You have some negotiating room with this loan program and your creditors to allow for you to show up as not being delinquent. It doesn't matter what your FICO score is, you just can't be delinquent. They actually created a little bit of a cushion 2 years ago, so you can actually be delinquent on almost, I think, $1,900 of debt, so realize that. In that cushion, though, you're probably going to need a cosigner, but you'll be given that information if you're declined as part of that. The thing about the decline, and a little bit frustrating for this program, is they don't do the credit check until it becomes closer to when school starts. I believe it's now 90 days that they will go back and do the credit check. So know that for whatever school you're going to, you'll get your award letter. If you put in the request for a Graduate Plus loan, it'll say you're going to be eligible for this amount of Grad Plus. But they're not going to run the credit check to determine whether you're credit eligible or worthy until around July. So they'll say, this is how much you'll be able to take out in Grad Plus, but when they run that credit check in July, that's when they say you are going to be able to get the money. All right, so realize that, and it may be in your interest to go look at your credit history to see if there's any blemishes that may trip you up along the way so you can anticipate that. The other thing that can affect you, and this really affected people during the Great Recession, pretty close to that 2010 date. If there's evidence of foreclosures, tax liens, repossessions, things like that. Most of the students who were hit really hard in that way have now become credit eligible because it's a 5-year timeline on that. So if that happened in 2010, it's been 2 years since. Any questions on the student loan side of things? Nope. Okay, yes. Yeah, it used to be the Stafford loan program. That shows you how old I am. So it's all technically referred to as the unsubsidized direct loan program. There's a question about, is there a limit on how much you can take out on these loans? And for these particular loans, yes. It's called the aggregate limit, and it's really high. I mean, I've actually have only had one student not qualify because they hit the aggregates, and this person had 2 graduate degrees from private institution as well as undergraduate debt. It's highly unlikely you're going to hit it. For each loan program, it's in the hundreds of thousands amount. So realize that. You can check on it. So you can go to the financial aid and see what your aggregate amount is, and if you have a concern, shoot me an email. There's also information on that page that you can do an internal search engine for that page on the Department of Education and just say aggregate limits, direct student loan, or graduate plus. Okay? Find out what those amounts are. Any other questions? Repayment options. These are the repayment options that are available to you right now. It's really confusing, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because these are where the largest number of the most recent changes have occurred in the federal financial aid system, the repayment options provided to candidates, going back to the administration of George Bush. The Obama administration has them, and now there's proposals that will affect these by the Trump administration. I'll talk about that in terms of just giving you a heads up in a few minutes. But basically, the repayment options are going to be based on the amount of debt you have or based on the amount of income you have. The ones based on the kind of debt you have are going to be the standard repayment, where you're going to have the same repayment over typically a 10-year period of time. A graduated repayment means that you start with smaller payments and increase those payments over a set period of time, 10 to 20 years. And then extended payment means you can have an extended period of time beyond 10 years to pay it back, but that extended period of time, each monthly payment will be the same amount. It depends on what that debt is. The income contingent, income-based, pay-as-you-earn or revised pay-as-you-earn are all tied to your income. It depends on how much you're making that will be calculated annually for your repayment options. It depends on the kind of debt you had and when you borrowed it. If you don't have debt coming into law school, it's going to be the repay program. There will be changes to even that one when you graduate. So while I'm prepared to answer questions, the thing that I want to spend a moment on is the thing to consider as you're weighing your options between schools is what kind of financial aid and loan repayment services will the schools be providing to you. We always allocate a portion of our budget to bringing in a consultant to meet with our third-year students for a half hour each to talk to them about the current status of their loan borrowing and what loan repayment options are available to them in conjunction with what their plans are for the next 5 to 10 years. Do they want to have a kid? Do they want to buy a house? What makes the most sense and kind of the options they take to repay these loans? The minimum type of loan repayment consultation or orientation or counseling that you have to go through under ABA and Department of Ed requirements is this online system where you answer a couple of questions and you kind of toggle through it. And it's highly ineffective. If any of you are recent graduates, I think it's Map Your Future, I think is the default one. Not very helpful. So we want to make sure we're investing with you guys, bringing in a consultant so that you're making as informed decisions as you can. And I think it's a fair question to ask schools that you're contemplating. I know you're spending 3 years educating me. I know you're spending time helping me with the financial aid, but are you going to help me figure out what's the best option once I reach graduation and what are the options even after that? And we do that for you by bringing in this consultant and making ourselves available to you. That's one of the things I do with my staff is make sure that they're trained on these types of things so they can answer those fundamental questions, or at least if they can't, direct you to places where there are more answers, or we'll try to figure them out for you. Okay? Was there a question back here? Yes and no. It depends on which one you're looking at. So for example, the two easiest examples for me to use are this pay-as-you-earn and revised pay-as-you-earn. So if you borrowed loans during a specific time period, you're eligible for this pay-as-you-earn for those loans. And if you're in the income-based repayment option, as long as you file your taxes as a single filer, if you're married, don't file jointly. And as a single filer, they will only look at your debt in calculating what your monthly payment will be for that year. And within that system, it also figures into that public service loan forgiveness option where you have 10 years or 120 months of regular payments to do. So it's a great program there. 2 years or 3 years ago, they changed it to this kind of thing called the revised pay-as-you-earn, because they got a sense as they went into the year in which a bunch of people were going to start getting public service loan forgiveness. They realized that there was advantages to people who were married to affluent spouses or physicians, that they were going to get a big payoff, that based on their income, even as they were wrapping this up, it didn't look good from a public policy standpoint. So they changed the rules. And the new rules, which you are going to be held to under the current revised pay-as-you-earn, is that in calculating your monthly payment for the year, it's always recalculated annually. They're going to take into account the family's income, regardless of whether you file jointly or separately, to determine what your monthly payments are. So if you're working for Utah Legal Services and making $40,000 a year, but you happen to be married to a spouse who's a cardiac surgeon and this person is making $600,000 a year, the calculation in determining what your monthly payment is going to be is the adjusted gross income of a gross salary of $640,000. The scary thing about that, in my opinion, but this is what we have to work with, is in the pay-as-you-earn, the original system and all the predecessors to that said the cap on the maximum amount of monthly payment you would have is what would your standard repayment have been if you had been in the standard repayment system for that 10-year repayment. So mathematically, if you have $100,000 of debt, if you're in the standard repayment system, your monthly payment would be about $1,100 a month. If you're in the standard 10-year repayment system. Under the pay-as-you-earn system, your monthly payment, if you're making $50,000 a year, is about $375 a month. Big difference, right? And if suddenly, they start calculating, you start making more money if you're a private practitioner and you hit a contingency fee, and they recalculate your income based on this $1 million contingency fee, they say, well, even though it looks like you made $1 million this year, the maximum amount you're going to pay is this $1,200 a month, because that's the cap. Under the revised pay-as-you-earn, there is no cap. So your income-based repayment amount is based on that total income. So it can be way more than it was for your standard fixed income, and it takes into account what the family's income is. All right, so that's one of the big changes there. So this is why it's complicated. They keep changing it, and it's important that you understand that the school that you go to has an understanding and a way to explain to you the impacts of your decisions on how much you borrow or what your options may be as you enter public service, things like that. Okay? College of Law scholarships. Oh, we're hitting the time. So I've already talked a little bit about that. So we have two types of scholarships, need-based scholarships and merit-based scholarships. The merit-based scholarships are divided into two categories, merit on entrance and merit scholarships for continuing students, merit and scholarships and fellowships. Need is strictly a formulaic calculation. Last year, for the people who got need-based scholarships, the average award was about $2,000. The awards for need range from $500 to $4,000. For merit on entrance, there's nothing you need to do. We just use your application materials to make the decisions on those. We've got first and second round offers. I've already explained how that works. For second and third year students, our website has the scholarships and awards page that you can go to and look at the scholarships and awards that we have for second and third year students, so that even if you didn't get a scholarship for merit on entrance, you can see what it takes to compete for scholarships in your second and third year. Scholarships are divided into scholarships and fellowships. Scholarships are the free money, you don't need to do anything. Fellowships usually have what we call a service requirement. Most of the time that service requirement is a job. You're working as a research assistant for a faculty member, things like that. This year we had 45 we call them graduate fellowships for students. This coming academic year we have 47, so it's usually between that 40 and 50 in terms of those. And for the scholarships, we're usually in that 15 to 20 range in terms of the scholarships that are available for second and third year students. And then there's the renewable scholarships for students who will continue to receive scholarships as long as they remain academically eligible. The academically eligible number is 3.25 GPA. That's roughly just below the top half of the class. I know we are in a minority of schools that doesn't just let you keep the scholarship as long as you don't get in academic trouble or you stay out of disciplinary trouble. The fact of the matter is our scholarships are tens of thousands of dollars in value, and we expect you to at least try to be in the top half of the class if we're going to be giving this money out. So we understand that other schools don't do that, but we feel you're entering a profession to which you will be held to high expectations. And just, this is kind of the world you're entering now. Yes, we have had some people lose them. It's a very small percentage, usually less than 20%. 2 years ago, no one lost their scholarship. And I can assure you that everybody who's selected for renewable scholarships, their index is predicting a much higher anticipated performance than the top half of the class. So it's not a bait and switch. You have demonstrated that you're more than capable of being there, but part of the law school experience is demonstrating that skill set. Then there's additional scholarships through the graduate school or the university. You can go to their website. I also encourage students to look at TA or RA positions in other disciplines as a possible resource. So if you either have a graduate degree or the fact that you have an undergraduate degree and are now a law student means you are a graduate student. You're part of the graduate school. So you're eligible to work for other departments as TAs or RAs. And we've had some students who have done that and receive a compensation package that includes a partial tuition waiver, a salary typically around $7,500 for the year, and then an office in one of the other buildings because that's where they're working with those other departments. Okay. Then finally, for those of you who may be moving here, or even if you're living here and you have a spouse, the university has a spouse or has an HR benefit that if you work here at least 3/4 time, for people who are working at least 3/4 time, their spouse and their dependents are covered by the insurance plan, and they also are covered by the 50% tuition waiver. For the person who's the actual employee of the university, it's after their probationary period, which I think is 90 days or 6 months for the tuition waiver. For spouses, 90 days. The person who's employed gets 50% off their tuition. And then for that person, their spouse and dependents qualify for that 50% waiver after 1 year. So that can add to the benefit there. So in helping pay for tuition costs. And it doesn't matter the position. It's just full-time. So you could be a groundskeeper or a researcher up at Huntsman. It's just part of our HR benefits plan. Residency, the policy is changing pretty dramatically for students. The reason that we dropped tuition is we know that for applying to the law school, we scared away lots of non-residents because our non-resident tuition was $52,000, way above the national average. So we proposed to the Board of Regents the new flat rate tuition plus a residency change that we did the calculation and said if a resident came in as a non-resident paying that high tuition rate and then got residency for the last 2 years, what would the tuition have been? And that's where we arrived at that $37,000 figure. The benefit to you non-residents coming in is that, that $37,000, but the thing is you cannot get residency after school starts. So whatever your residency classification is, at the start of school in your first year, you will be that residency classification for all 3 years. The benefit of that change, though, is that you no longer have to apply for residency. And part of applying for residency when you were a law student is that you couldn't leave Utah during your first year summer. So if you were from Montana and you had a job with a law firm up there, you had to stay in Utah that first year summer. Now you can go, and it doesn't affect your tuition rate. So we're hoping it'll benefit our students in the employment side of things to go on and get jobs elsewhere if they want, because they're marketable starting in their first year summer. Secondly, it takes the bureaucracy out of the way. You don't have to worry about filing all this paperwork once you start school if you're non-resident to try and gain that residency, which we see as a benefit. And then it's a financial wash also for you in that regard. There's no difference from being able to get residency and now not getting residency and paying $37,000 a year. But it does put pressure on those who need to file for residency before school starts to get reclassified to make it happen. Okay. We already talked about all these things. Flat rate tuition. I've already alluded to how the system's going to work. I know for a lot of you who come from schools who had flat rate tuition, this is not news. But for students who are undergraduates from the University of Utah, this is a big change from the per hour credit system. So you're going to pay for tuition by the block. The fall and spring semester, it is presumed that you will be paying 2 blocks because you will be enrolled on average for 15 credits. In the summer, you will be allowed to enroll for up to 8 credits, and that'll be charged at 1 block. Whether you take any less, though, that block amount stays the same. So if you sign up for 2 credits, up to 8 credits, if you're in 2 credits, you're still paying that full block price. So for the joint degree students, you're going to want to stagger your classes in such a way as you're getting as close to that 8 as you possibly can so that you're not losing the financial benefit of this. This block plan was instituted for a couple of reasons. One is it allows us to do better budget management for our resources within the law school. Secondly, it is our hope that it allows you to make more course selections based on classes you like, not based on how much the credits are going to cost you. Because what we found as law school became more expensive, as students in their 3rd year approached the 88 credits they needed to graduate, they were always targeting that 88 number. So even though they saw a class that if they had 86 credits, and there's a class they would love to take that was 4 credits, they wouldn't take that class. They'd look for the 2-credit class just to get them to 88 because it was going to cost them a couple of thousand more. So what we're hoping is, as a result of this flat rate tuition, you'll be able to take up to 16 credits each semester and graduate with 92 credits, because you can only take 15 in your first year because it's assigned. But if you take the maximum amount you're eligible every semester after that, you can graduate with as many as 92 credits, but pay the same amount. So there was the educational value we saw in going to a flat rate tuition, right? Non-law classes, you play by the credit hour. So if you went and you were signed up for 15 credits in the law school, you'd play that 2 blocks of tuition. And then if you wanted to take an engineering class because you're working on a master's of engineering, but you're not a joint degree student, you just want to wrap it up, you'd pay that additional hour at their rate, right? So things will be an add-on for that flat rate tuition since the rest of the university is still on the hour system. Okay. Helpful websites. We're going to post these slides to the admitted student page. Okay. Any questions? All right, we went 5 minutes over, which is better than I had hoped. I want to thank you for your time today. For those of you who are going to do the neighborhood tours, why don't you meet us in front of the admissions suite, which is on the 2nd floor near the east entrance. And we're scheduled to start at 3 for the tours? At 2:30. So we will meet you. Let's start at 2:45 because I know that there's going to be some questions I have, and you can take 15 minutes to go to the restroom, check out the patio if you like. So at 2:45, those who have signed up or want to do the neighborhood tours in the vans with us, meet in front of the admissions suite. For the rest of you, I very much thank you for your time. We really would like to have you all enroll in our program. I hope we were able to impress you with the quality of our programming today and some of our foundational thoughts and missions about law school is about the students. We care about the experience you're having and the access to faculty and preparing you to become professionals. But whatever your choice is, you guys are a really strong group of students because we do admit the best. And you will have opportunities and successes ahead of you. We hope we're a part of that. But if not, we wish you the best. And for those of you who celebrate Passover and Easter, I hope you have a joyous celebration with your families. And for those of you who are going on a tour with us, we'll see you in 15 minutes. Thank you for your time.